All right, welcome back to the program. You're still watching Daybreak on Trust TV. Here's a quick reminder that you can watch the show on the go by joining our YouTube and Facebook live streams. Also follow us across our social media platforms. Do check out our website, trusttv.com, for more news as well as programs and documentaries. Back here in the studio, let's set the ball in motion for today's conversation as high temperatures, the high temperature and non-implementation of environmental impact assessment reports as well as the pollution audit in the Niger Delta have raised serious concerns about Nigeria's environmental stewardship. Now, these issues cast doubt on the country's efforts to combat hunger, use natural resources efficiently, as well as prevent environmental damage. Unregulated mining, deforestation, oil and gas extraction, and land reclamation are also major contributors to environmental degradation and why most Nigerians remain in poverty today, despite the abundance of some of these natural resources. Now, join us on the program to help us navigate some of these issues. We have joining us as Dr. Yusuf Abdullahi, who's a former General Manager, Kaduna State Environmental Protection Authority, popularly known as KEPA. Doctor, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's good to see you.
Good morning for having me.
Thank you. First and foremost, let's just simplify the conversation by understanding the connection, the nexus between what's happening to the environment, the poverty that it is causing, and also the opportunity that's been missed. Because we talk about illegal mining, we talk about deforestation. A lot of people translate these things differently. When you talk about deforestation, for instance, one of the reasons why it's very unpopular with the majority of Nigerians is because it allows for cheaper access to energy, isn't it? Especially when you talk about fuel wood and things like that. So give us an understanding of this conundrum that we're faced with. Because on one hand, we understand the impact it is having. On the other hand, it is a solution to millions and millions of people who are responsible for it.
Well, if you define environment as a space that nurtures life, and this environment is endowed with so many elements, we call them environmental assets, that will help human beings and other living things to survive. And part of the endowment are trees. But you see, the environmental quality, that is the quality of these environmental assets, is always degraded by poverty and hunger. So these are the major drivers of, environmental degradation. And of course, with a poverty rate of over 70%, you don't expect our environmental quality to be at par with societies that are, that are affluent and are doing well. So if you look at the case of charcoal, for example, in a country where over 70% are poor, and then where also energy poverty is prevalent in Nigeria, people don't have enough money to buy either gas and other cleaner sources of fuel and energy. So all they have left for them are these environmental assets that are relatively free and cheap and fairly accessible. In developed countries, they ensure that these fuel and energy are affordable, they are accessible, and the poor are never exposed to poverty in this regard. But in our own case, if you are poor, you live somewhere in the frontline states, those states bordering the Niger Republic, Chad. In those, before you see it, what we call a woodlot. It takes a while for you to be able to see a woodlot, and in those kind of environments, you can see as far as 5-10 kilometers, in a very clear weather. That is to show you that they don't have vegetation. In fact, they come down to what we call North Central, and enjoy or maybe encourage the harvest of fuel wood and charcoal, so that they can carry it to their state in order to drive their kitchens. So this has to stop. But unless and until, because this is not an individual responsibility. In environmental management, there are things that we call environmental responsibilities. The government has to decide that, okay, these assets are valuable to the society, and find a way of subsidizing access to cleaner and cheaper forms of fuel and energy. In the absence of that, of course, individual and citizens will just, on their own, they'll be looking for cheaper and affordable sources of fuel. And that is what keeps on driving, the quest for fuel wood and charcoal. Until government do something, we'll continue, to exhaust to enjoy some of these cheaper environmental assets. And of course, future generations may not be able to see some of this environmental endowment that God has given us. Ultimately, that is what is going to happen. So the government is key to ensuring that these environmental assets are conserved, not only for the use of current generation, but also they are preserved and protected for future generations.
All right, Doctor. Listeners or viewers would be saying, I'm sure to themselves, that you have functioned within the framework of a government office. So the question really is, from your interactions with people who should know, at that level of governance, do you think these governors or governors at the state level understand the inherent danger in what we are doing? Because today we are beginning to live with the effect of global, disruption in the global ecosystem. Yeah. We have floods, ravaging cities, and in more frequent manner as we used to. Those days, in a decade, you probably will have an incident. Now, in 5 years, you have two, and you are not sure when the next one is coming. At the onset of the rainy season, we are already getting warnings about places will be flooded. Even with this reality, do you think they really do understand that governance is at the heart, of safeguarding our environmental ecosystem?
You see, there's a huge disconnect, or what you can easily call communication gaps. The linkages are not really there between institution of environmental governance. That is to say, at local level, you have the environmental health office, or domesticated at the local government level. At the state, just like you mentioned, I was privileged to lead the Kaduna State Environmental Protection Authority. At the federal level, we have NESRIA and Federal Ministry of Environment. Now, there is a huge disconnect between this institution of environmental governance and what I may tend to call, environmental politics. We have a lot of political parties, but in most cases, they don't have a green or environmental agenda that people can actually key in. Then at the level of environmental education, that is at kindergarten, nursery, primary, secondary, and tertiary level, the scope of environmental education actually is too limited for it to serve any purpose for our present situation. So this lack of linkages is the reason why some of these, how can I call them, current modern technologies and even indigenous talents, because our forefathers have not been experienced this kind of environmental disasters, and they have their own way of managing them. So this residual or cumulative indigenous intelligence in most cases has been lost, because the educated class, if you look at us, we call ourselves academics and researchers. We find it difficult to communicate to the political leadership that these are the challenges. Yes, at a point in time I was in the academics, but most of our researchers, that is where they end.
On the shelf.
Yes, on the shelf. We find it very difficult to communicate to the political class, look, these are the environmental challenges and these are the solutions, because they have the power, they have the resources. Although maybe here and there you can see the politicians speaking, one or two experts in terms of environmental management, but still the environmental performance in the country is relatively very, very low until we're able to establish linkages. An academic should be able to go to a local government department of environmental health and make suggestions as how to improve environmental performance in that particular domain. That is not being done the way it should be. If you go outside this country, I could remember when I was in Scotland, my research was financed by what you call European Social Fund. They want to invest in a very small aspect of environmental performance, which is just waste management. And they were able to invest in the academia so that the academia will produce a research that is useful to the community. Yes. But in this country, if you are pursuing an MSc or a PhD, the funding is not there. You have to start thinking of what to do and how to finance your own research within your own limited resources. At the end of the day, you produce results that even you yourself, they are not usable to you. You cannot patent them, you cannot sell them. And whenever somebody that is educated and experienced in environmental management is appointed to the position where he can do something, you realize that the support is not usually there for him to be able to add value to environmental performance. And we need to work together. Environmental performance is a teamwork, and it's beyond one single individual, it's beyond one single government institution. Nigeria is a signatory to several environmental conventions. Now, some of these conventions required us as a country to pull all our resources together. It's not only about money. Sometimes, even my experience when I was in Kaduna, it's not only about money. Those linkages, you need to be able to tell the governor that this is the magnitude of this environmental challenge, and these are the safeguards that he needs to put in place at the right time. You've talked about flooding, yes. You've talked about flooding. And we're lucky we have NISA, we have NIMET. They produce some early warning systems. They are able to project that, okay, even sometimes to hours, that by social hour there is going to be a rainfall. So if you know that rain is going to come maybe by 12 o'clock, you need to put the necessary safeguards to ensure that once the rain falls, there is a drain. Your environment is well drained, that the water will not be able to flood your own environment.
Yeah, Doctor, I mean, some would argue that we have, the necessary resources as far as human resources is concerned, people with the right intellect. The government has always had a lot of information available to it, whether it's at federal or at state level. However, the political will to act on it is something entirely different. Looking at, the commemoration this year of the World Environment Day and how we're talking about the environment, the participation of Nigeria in COP28, the huge buzz around it, the federal government said, even listen, our CNG bus initiative is also showing our, consciousness as well as, sensitivity towards, climate change. Do you get a sense that we're pivoting in the right way and at the right frequency to address this pressing need? Because, the telltale signs are there that we don't have the luxury of time to address some of these concerns.
Yeah, I will still go back to the same point. When it comes to environmental, well, I can call it noise or climate change noise. You see, we are very prominent. If you look at our participation in the past COPs, a lot of Nigerians go there to say one thing or the other. But when you come back home and you try to assess what is called the climate change action or environmental action, that is the responsibility for which we are supposed to carry out within a specific time frame. You realize that the climate action or environmental action is usually very low or non-existent. And the very reason is that it's either the wrong people are representing us at those international platforms, or those that are here, they are not they are not resourced enough to be able to shoulder their environmental responsibility. If you look at the local government, for example, in those days when we were growing up as kids, you see sanitarians moving from door to door, house to house. In Hausa, we call them dubagari. These are the people that ensure that environmental performance is domesticated and enforced, within families and households, in communities. But today, because of the way local government have been disempowered, most of these environmental responsibilities have been abandoned, and states are not designed to shoulder community-level environmental action, where a citizen or maybe a community is required to actually clean itself, rid itself of environmental risk. Those things are better enforced by a local government. States cannot be moving from door to door, or maybe from one community to another, trying to enforce environmental compliance. And that is where we lost it. If local governments are not, empowered enough with the resources, most of these sanitarians, they are still there, but they don't do anything. They only collect salaries because they need tools. You need to empower them with tools and other resources for them to be able to do their work. I can't remember seeing any state, even while I was in the government in Kaduna, there is no local government where sanitarians are active. And as long as they are not active, when it comes to environmental action and environmental compliance, at citizen, family and community level, we forget it. There will be no action. Nothing will ever.
Doctor, just listening to you and also trying to see from what Abdullahi has said, I would like you to properly situate it, because in your opening statement you describe some of those climate champions as climate noisemakers. And so for me, the question really is it that we have short supply of people who understand this problem and its magnitude, or does it just end at the level of the unwillingness of government at state and state level to support some of these actions, or allow local government to function that would in turn support it? Where do we have the biggest problem? And if you identify that, what can we do outside governance, outside state governments, to at community level, at state level, begin some kind of awareness campaign, if you like, to drive home the importance of some of these things? Because like you said, we are racing against time. Whether or not we choose to be docile and allow the government not to pay attention to it, we will live with the consequences anyway.
Yes, I think the fact is that we need to go back to our constitution. If you look at our constitution, it domesticated certain environmental responsibilities to the local government, and certain environmental responsibilities are given to the state government, and the federal government is, as at the top of the pyramid. It also has its own share of environmental responsibilities. What you are saying is that since the local government have been, so to say, disempowered, it means that if you go to the local government, they have no action plan, not only on environment, but equally on other aspects of governance. The local governments are actually very weak. And the drivers of environmental or climate change advocates in our own space, most of them happen to be non-governmental organizations or civil societies. And most of these, for this kind of organization, visibility is key. If you are getting your funds from outside the country, you need to make a lot of noise, you need to carry out a lot of activities. But that is where it ends, because most of these foreign donors or foreign partners, they don't actually finance the community-based environmental actions. Those responsibilities are to be shouldered by your institution of environmental governance. So you need the local government to start funding its own officers to go out and domesticate and some of these ideas. If you go to your streets, what are you doing to clean your environment? We still have problem with waste management. We still have problem of managing our shit floor. When you go our toilet, we still have problem with open defecation. So in a situation where you have problem managing your solid waste, where you have a challenge managing your shit flow, and you want to jump to climate action, I think you are not doing.
You think we're getting our priorities wrong on this one?
You need to prioritize.
We can talk about the failings of the actualization of the Great Green Wall Initiative. I mean, some would say it's still pretty much it's still something that we can salvage. But looking at some of the images that we're putting up on our screen, the commemorations have a way of reminding us what we need to do about the environment, because we need Mother Earth more than it needs us actually. Do you think sensitizations like this, especially at the local level, is gaining ground based on what you've been seeing, what you've been hearing? Do you think starting at the local level, for instance, even outside of government activities, is enough momentum to help us make the appropriate changes?
From my experience as a teacher in the academia and my small exposure in government, I can tell you that we are blowing. That is why I call it climate noise. We need much more than that. The concept of environmental education is that you need to internalize your responsibilities. It's not about awareness. You need to know it's an intellectual process. If you look at advanced countries, environmental education, even right from your house, the moment you are born, your parents start training you. These are the things that are expected of you in your own house. In some houses, for example, the children are responsible for sweeping the house and then gathering all the trash and putting it in a certain collection point. Now, the movement of trash from the collection point to another place is not the responsibility of children. It's the responsibility of adults. In Japan, the children clean their classes. Sometimes they even clean their toilet. I have seen that. So the environmental education, that is where we lost the game. But it's something that has to be a collective. It's not the responsibility of environmentalists alone. This is a country where curricula has not changed sometimes for 50 years. You know, now we have iPhone, is it 15? Or, yes, yes. So things are changing in other aspects of our lifestyle. But in terms of environmental responsibilities, we tend to be going backwards. In fact, if you remember, if you go back to say maybe 50, 60, 70 years, you know, you don't hear about these flooding events damaging farmlands, destroying communities, because our forefathers, they have evolved a way of managing this environmental challenge using their own indigenous intelligence. Now we have several, you know, environmental engineers, environmental scientists, a great diversity of experts, and yet we cannot even solve our basic problems. If we go to any city in Nigeria, and then you have a septic tank, you know, that is not the standard way of managing sewage. That is your sheet flow. The septic tank is an off-system way of, it's like an emergency way of managing
solid waste.
Sheet flow, not solid waste. Sheet, you know, liquid waste is different from solid waste, and the liquid waste is much more dangerous. That is the reason why global community is trying to invest in a lot of money to ensure that we eradicate open defecation. Because when you defecate openly, it means whatever is there can easily spread and impact us. Sometimes even across borders. So it is very, very important for you to take your basic environmental responsibility very seriously.
As someone, as an environmentalist that you are, when you look at the case file that is Nigeria, are you more concerned or optimistic that we're about to get it right?
I can say it's better you say it's better for you to be concerned,
right?
Because as I have told you before, it's not. This is not limited to the area of environmental governance. We have problem with our health, with our education, with security, with other things. But I think,
and there's a correlation.
Yes, there has to be a correlation. If you fail in one of them, you are much more likely to fail in the others. So those that are expert, we have, I think, over 10,000 civil and environmental engineers, and yet Abuja is the only city with a sewer. That should tell you something.
And it's just Abuja metropolis.
Yes, it's just Abuja metropolis. Now, if you follow that value chain, you realize that, well, you don't find a lot of local engineers and experts, you know, managing or in the building. Certainly, Nigerians are not the ones that build it. They are not the ones that are maintaining the system. So that technology transfer, even though, you know, a lot of Nigerians now are abroad and they have this kind of expertise, but the opportunity for them to come and add value to their communities is not actually there. Now, environmental assets such as this sewer, wastewater treatment plants, they are not cheap and easy to build. If you want to supply water to a city of 1 million, that kind of project cannot be shouldered by a local government. That kind of project sometimes, in most cases, is beyond the state. It's only maybe the federal level that can source for funding, you know, for such kind of an investment. But the mistake we are making is that where we already have this structure, you can clearly see it in the provision of potable water. You know, a provision of potable water, such kind of assets are supposed to be managed by the local government. Because if you have a problem with your water supply, it's easier for you to access the local council and make complaints about these things, and it will be equally easier for them to go and make repairs. But if you have to go to the provisional or the state government to lay this complaint, you realize at the end of the day, we're hardly getting it right. The previous system that we used to have 40, 50 years ago, when we had regional government, they were by far much more effective than the system that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, look at the scale of the problem versus the scale of the solution. It leaves much to be desired. Dr. Abdullahi Yusuf Regasa, as much as we'd love to continue the conversation, a very interesting one and a very timely one for that matter, we're going to have to anchor the conversation here until next time when we circle back to this all-important discussion. Thank you most kindly for your expert analysis and your insights. We really appreciate you for stopping by this
Thank
morning.
you for having me.
Thank you so much for stopping. All right. That is our conversation on the state of environment in Nigeria, especially looking at some of the irregular activities around illegal mining as well as deforestation, contributing to not just environmental degradation, but also the surging poverty in the country. We're going to take a moment's break. When we come back, we'll take you through the front pages of some select national dailies this morning as we take a look at the stories making the headlines. Newspaper review is up next.